Hi there, this is Justin from the band Proletariat. I handled a lot of the production and mixing on our first EP that we were just about to release. This is the first track, Behind the Sun, which we just recently released. So I want to walk through some of the composition and production ideas that went into this track, maybe a couple tips that can be gleaned from what we've done. Basically what I'm going to do is go section by section, play a little bit, and then tell you some of what's going on. I'll try and keep it to stuff that's mostly interesting. One thing you'll notice, the way I'm recording this is I'm actually recording the sound into Logic. So you'll see me like soloing this talk back all the time. Don't really pay attention to that. That's just so you can hear me talking. So let me play the intro and tell you a little bit about it. So the whole intro section of this song is really driven by this one hook. And so this is a preset in Alchemy, which is a synth within Logic. I believe that like pretty much all the sound we got out of just holding down one key and letting the preset do its thing. So it's almost more like a sample that we ripped from Alchemy. I'm not going to go into how I did that, but the lesson there is you never know what you're going to find in a cool preset. So I just have it bounced to audio because Alchemy is a huge CPU drain. And so it's got this little intro beat thing going on. Super simple. And then it comes in later with an additional little piece of percussion and some 808. So I'll let you hear that. The two little pieces of percussion, the intro beat is all low-end stuff. The percussion adds some high-end clicky stuff, just kind of drag and build energy. Not drag, drive. Also, just real quick looking at this 808, the only kind of interesting thing I have going on here is in the compressor. You can see I'm clipping it a little bit, adding a little bit of distortion, and really the idea there is just to get a little bit more high-end out so it doesn't get lost in a mix. And this is just an 808 preset that I built within Massive. It's really just like a sine wave that drops its frequency and kind of follows the kick pattern. Last little thing is this guitar that you can hear here. So that was just recorded into an amp, some delay, kind of dotted eighth kind of thing. And the reason I have that guitar is it's leading into what comes next. I'll let you hear the first verse.
Come and find me. I'm a lost, forgotten one. Shadows bind me.
Okay, so this whole section is driven by another of these little hooks. I'll let you listen to it. So this actually also came from that same Alchemy preset. I just changed some of the parameters, added some filtering. You can see I'm filtering a bunch of low end out and throwing it into a little bit of reverb. So that's what's cool about working with presets rather than starting just with a sample, is that you can kind of tweak what's going on and make it fit the dynamics. The other thing that drives it is this guitar here. And that's really the same guitar that was in the intro. And that kind of, those two together drive this little section. The drums are super minimalistic.
Come and find me.
Literally, that's it.
Shadows bind
There's a little bit of bass as well. So here, you can see that we're adding another percussion track. Let me play that. So that's got a bigger snare that kind of anchors that little groove. And so after that intro, it's on to another verse, very similar to the first, but we're adding one element.
Come and find me.
And again, I think this is actually alchemy, but I bounced it out because I don't want that screwing up my CPU.
Run.
So as far as how this course is put together, this is all based on this synth called Aggressor. Let me just drag this down. So here's what's going on here. This is kind of my go-to for heavy sounding stuff. So this is in massive. It's a lot of kind of sawtooth kind of stuff, a little bit of overdrive, some feedback. And so this really drives the whole sound. And then in addition to that, I use another preset that I use a lot, this burning saws. Kind of warbly, lots of high end. And this is a pretty wide sound. I actually have it panned a little bit. So if you're listening in headphones, you can probably hear that the burning saws is way off to the left, and that kind of adds a little bit of space. Then, in addition, there's a really crunchy 808 that drives this from the bass end. Sorry, it took me a minute to find the talk back, so let me play this. Same 808 from before, pretty much, but there's some overdrive on it, which of course makes it louder, but also brings it up into higher end stuff, so you can hear it on small speakers. That's really important. In addition to that, there's some percussion. The percussion on this section really kind of out like builds the whole vibe and feel for this song. So let me play it. So the way I think about it is it's like it's the sound of a door slamming, basically. So this whole song, Behind the Sun, it's kind of got like a 90s vibe. So we kind of tried to design it as if it's something you'd listen to in like a disco in Berlin in 1993. That's kind of like the feel we went for. Anytime I work on a song, I like to not just think about technically what's going on, but I like to think about what's a place that I could put someone in with this music. And that's what we were going for pretty much all the way through. So some of the choices we made try to reflect that. So this main percussion piece is from Battery. And I think the preset's actually called Berlin Headquarters or something. I think. So that's cool. Just coincidental that it matched with the vibe we were going for. Probably why I clicked on it. But let's listen to it. So this is just a pretty simple kick. But then we have this snare, which is just smashed. We're bit crushing it. I've got bit crusher on the bus, and then there's also just this sound. So it's made up of two snares, this little thing, and this really smushy kind of sound. And so this snare, I'll talk a lot about this as I go on, but this snare I got by ripping it out of an old mix on this song. So something that we did a lot of, or that I did a lot of as I was mixing down this track, is we spent almost a year just working on this track and agonizing over it and messing with different aspects of it. And so there were a lot of mixes that we produced. And a friend of mine, Joel Sellers, also contributed just a couple mixes. We kind of sent stuff off to him to see, if he had any different ideas he could contribute that we hadn't thought of. And so just over the course of a year, we're just saving all the mixes in Logic files. And there were certain things that we really liked about some mixes. And so when it came time to mix this, to send it off to mastering, it was difficult to figure out how to capture what we liked from each different mix. And so the approach that I settled on was I was just going to pull my favorite tracks out of each mix and sections out of each mix and kind of throw them all together and see what happened. And it actually worked really well. So it's a new technique I'd never tried. I really like it. I'd recommend it if you have songs that just kind of are hanging around for a long time before you release. So this track, this particular ripped snare, this is just loaded with bit crusher. You can hear it, the kind of fizzling and the decay. That's like when the reverb trail gets bit crushed and it doesn't quite fall down linearly in volume. That's why it sounds like that. So this is just bounced out of a previous Logic session, and that drives a lot of the snare sound. There's also this little bit of percussion, which again I ripped from an older mix, and this is Logic's drummer before I mixed it, and basically it's just like some shakers, a little bit of snare, and I think it stacks pretty nicely with the snare that we actually added on its own. So this chorus snares is really that kind of like door slamming in your face kind of sound, and then the ripped percussion is more of that high kind of dancier sounding snare. And so when it all stacks up together, it sounds like this. So that was kind of new for us because it's our first house sounding drum pattern and kick and all that. On the kick itself, there's a bunch of overdrive. This is a plugin I really like from NI Complete, which I use a lot. And this is kind of the EQ I go to when I don't just want kind of flat or clean, uncolored EQing, when I kind of want to add something that wasn't there. And so when I want to add low end to something, oftentimes I'll go ahead and use this. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just adding a little bit of low end that wasn't really there to begin with. And look at that real quick. So here's the original. It's kind of subtle, but there's this like blooming low end that you can hear when I add it. And then when I overdrive it, it's just adding more high-end stuff subtly, so on small speakers you're going to hear it. And then I cut a little bit of the really low stuff out, just because I thought it was a little too bass heavy in the mix. So the last thing that's going on in this chorus, and this is definitely from like a composition kind of viewpoint, is this guy. It's called Dancy, and this is just to make people dance. So it's that kind of offbeat sound to add another rhythmic layer, kind of a contrasting rhythmic layer. So this is a sound from Massive, mostly just a preset that was messed with. I don't really have enough hours in the day to make all my sounds from scratch. I'd rather find a preset that's good and then tweak it as necessary. As is a theme, there's a bunch of bit crusher on this, so let me look at that real quick. It makes it louder, a little uglier, a little crazier. Same kind of idea with the EQ. Adding a little bit of mid to help it cut. And then to make this pop through the mix, you can, I'll show you what I did. I do a little bit of side chaining. So, for example, if we take a look at the kick, and, well, maybe not the kick. This. Okay. Well, I'll talk more about this later, but I have a compressor set up to pretty much everything in the track except for that, except for that Dancy. So this compressor is sidechained to instrument 16, which is in fact Dancy. So you can see that it's just subtly easing off on the volume when those notes from the dancey track come through, basically to make space for it. That's the whole reason that that's done. If you don't do that, this kind of offbeat dancey sound just competes with all the other stuff going on. And with this really crunchy 808 and the kick, and those are both so rhythmic, and they both have some decay to them. If you don't have that kind of side chaining, it's hard. It really doesn't fit in. It just doesn't sound cohesive. It sounds like two different sounds competing against each other, which, I mean, that's really what it is from a composition perspective. But as far as getting them to sit in the mix, you don't want them to fight because they're all in the same frequencies. The last thing going on is this little snare guy here. So that's totally just to build a little bit of energy going into the next verse. Cool. So this next verse, I ripped everything out of an old session. I colored them all to make that stand out to me. So I just literally went in, ripped the stems, dropped them in. I did a little bit of compressing some stuff, which I'll talk about, but for the most part, I just ripped it straight out. So I'll just play it real quick.
Come and find me. I'm a lost, forgotten one. Shadows bind me. Chase the light behind the sun.
Okay, so first, why did I rip this out of an old session? The most powerful reason is just that I felt like we nailed the vibe we wanted on that old mix. And it was an older mix, so like it wasn't perfect. I didn't agonize on it. It wasn't like a meticulous mix, but it just had the right feel. So I ripped it out the way I had it there. This whole section, let me just drag my talk back down so I can solo stuff. Okay, this whole verse is based on this one track, this slap bass. So let's listen to that. It's really ugly, super compressed, lots of high end for a bass, snarly, distorted, kind of gross sounding, especially on its own. But that's just the sound we wanted. Again, we wanted like disco, East Berlin, 90s. So I thought this was a way to get to that vibe. I don't know if they listen to stuff like this in Berlin, but whatever. So this is actually recorded straight into Logic with the bass plugin that comes with Logic. I'm sure there's like overdrive added, maybe even some bit crushing. But again, I bounced this out, and when I put it into the real mix, I thought it had a little bit too much bass, so I cut some. But then as far as what else is going on, these leads should sound fairly familiar. So it's the same leads from the first verse, plus that pluck sound that I talked about earlier. Nothing really new there. I just like the way it sat in that mix. With the kick, super basic, boring, not all that powerful, which is fine because the bass has all the power in the groove. Also, take a look over here as I play this. So in Logic, this bar is showing how much gain is being pulled back from the compressor. This compressor is sidechained by that kick drum. So every time it kicks, the bass gets a little bit quieter, and that makes room for the kick drum to come through without being crazy loud. Let me show you with and without the sidechaining. So yeah, I mean the compressor's making it a little bit louder. Let me see. I don't know if there's an easy way to turn side. Here, let's do this. So no side chaining. It's subtle, but there's more groove to it. It feels like a cohesive whole rather than two things just kind of doing their own thing and competing with each other. So this snare and percussion is really similar to the stuff from the first verse. Pretty much the same kind of thing. Nothing really to talk about there. This compressor is sidechained on the snare, is sidechained off of something, but I don't know off the top of my head what it is. Might actually be the bass, if we look at it. Yeah, so the snare is being sidechained on the bass, and the reason for that, when I think about sidechaining, I think about what frequency things live in and make them coexist. So if I pull down the volume of the snare a little bit when the bass is taking up those higher registers, because like I talked about, it's this gross, grimy, funky bass, that just makes some more space, and when the bass is gone or not playing a beat, the snare can be a little bit louder and it doesn't sound like a letdown. And then the last little thing in this section is this guitar. So it's just like a really high, funky, I guess, kind of sound. I got made fun of for playing this kind of stuff in high school. But there's this filter opening that you can hear. Starts here with the filter almost all the way closed. Again, this is bounced out, so I can't show you the actual filter. You can also hear a little synth in the background, like the cheesiest, most obnoxious synth you can imagine. But when it opens all the way up, it just adds that a little something. Then the filter closes again to just make everything a little bit quieter so things are bigger when we go to the next chorus. So let's just listen to the tail end of that.
Chase the light behind the sun.
So it's subtle, but that filter coming down on the guitar right before the chorus kind of signals that there's something new happening. So this chorus is super similar to the one you just heard. I'm not going to talk much about it at all. In fact, it's pretty much all the same. This is new, super subtle, but you can kind of hear it. And then more important is this guy. It sounds like crap on its own, but it contributes to the vibe. Like, you can tell something's missing when I pull it out. Okay, so the next section is a pretty late addition to this track. Let me walk you through what's happening. This is where we go full 90s techno, German style. So I'll play it real quick. Okay, so this leads into something big, as you can probably guess. So again, a kick that I straight ripped out of something that I thought sounded good, like an older mix. Hold on, where'd my talkback go? Cool. There's not much bass in it at all, and that's intentional because the kick that comes in later you're going to see is crazy. And then we've got this little guy going on. Super digital sounding. And it fades in, it gets louder because this whole section is building. Okay, and then this is more interesting. This is, so this is audio. This one's actually not bounced from something else. This is actual, honest to goodness audio that was recorded into this Logic session. This is coming from my mini log. It's a Korg mini log. It's an outboard analog synth that my wife bought me, which is awesome. So I'll play it and I'll talk about it. So it's got a ton of low end, but it's also got a really distorted kind of character to it. The way I did this, go look up what a mini log looks like and what it is. But I had a pretty basic sound that I was creating on it. And then I plugged the output of the mini log into a guitar tuner that had two outputs. One of those outputs goes into my audio interface and into Logic. The other output goes through an overdrive pedal and back into the mini log. So what I'm doing is I'm feedbacking a signal out of the output in the mini log, and then it has a section where you can plug in an audio input to process along with the synth. So I'm feeding in a hugely distorted feedback signal, which it does crazy things, very unpredictable things. In this case, it's causing it to like oscillate or get close to oscillation around a really low frequency. And that's like set, it'd be hard for me to tell you, but set like based on the inductance and capacitance of the cables and stuff. You know, it's black magic kind of stuff. But by doing that, I'm pulling the mini log, which doesn't normally have a lot of low end, and it's kind of cool as for leads, but kind of wussy for bass stuff. I'm pulling the whole register that plays in down and adding a bunch of distortion and other weird stuff. So if you listen, you can hear some clicks. Right there, you heard one. So that's like part of just the virtue of having an imperfect analog synth, also the part of the virtue of feedbacking and overdriving and making it do things it's not supposed to do. And that gives it a really cool sound. And I do the same thing for these other mini log tracks. So let's listen to this one. This one's called Club Banger. Also fades in. So okay, so this one's super cool, very like analog-y in that it does a lot of imperfect stuff that'd be hard to like program it to do. But this sounds like it's some kind of pulse width modulation preset. And again, this, like, I can't even show you an old version of Logic. This is hardware, and whatever settings were set on it are lost to history. But it sounds like it's some kind of pulse width modulation setting. Look that up if you don't know what it is. And then you too can become 90s techno. But it's, again, overdriven, feedbacked, doing all that kind of thing, which is why it sounds crazy. And here you can hear it like the feedback pulls it away from the note it's supposed to play. Right there, you can hear it. It's no longer playing the note it's supposed to be playing, which is super cool. That's why I love analog stuff, and you can just screw with it. You can hear here that I click on a delay. And that's not in Logic. That's an outboard delay that I pulled off my guitar rig for this sound. So that's cool. And before we move forward, I threw this pad over the whole thing, which of course has to fade in. So this pad is a collection of samples that lives in Contact. I love downloading random pads, random samples that I can play. This, I think, comes from Big Cat Audio. They have all kinds of free stuff, weird stuff, cool stuff. I really like using samples in a pad as opposed to just creating something because, I don't know, to me, there's something kind of unique about this sample. You have no idea where it came from, or sample library. You have no idea where it came from, what was done to it, how it's going to sound, in different registers. And I love just collecting them and just throwing one on. I really enjoy working that way rather than having to design a sound each time. So that's what I'm doing here. And this pad just kind of does its thing, builds up slowly, and just kind of covers the section so it's not naked. So let me play into the next section, which is a lot louder. So there's a little bit more going on here. Let me talk you through it. So the first thing that we add is a different kick. And this one is actually straight out of battery. And you guessed it, there's a bunch of overdrive. And that same kind of low frequency boost. So I probably just copied this from further up. And notice from a composition perspective, it's not just a 4 on the floor, it's this really annoying, dancey, I don't know, techno-y kind of thing. Just totally over the top. completely unnecessary, but that's what I live for. The bum bum bum. Okay, in addition to that, we have this addition still playing. So there is snare happening here, but it's super in the background. It doesn't really form the basis of what's going on here. Same bass. Same club banger thing. And you can kind of hear it deviating from what it's supposed to sound like, deviating from the notes that it's theoretically supposed to be playing. That's always fun. And then what leads into this is this mini log shriek, which is the same idea. It's the mini log feedbacked into itself with a bunch of overdrive. And the way I have it set up, it drops in pitch. I don't think that that's actually a pitch slide. I think that that is like the oscillation of the feedback dragging it down. I think in fact, if I remember correctly, I was turning the gain knob on the overdrive pedal to change where that oscillation was centered around. So yeah, that's random. And we have this deliciously crunchy 808. Let me show you. This is like completely smashed. Absolutely. If I take the overdrive off, it's already smashed just because of the settings I have in here. Yeah, this wet setting is mixing in more sawtooth and not just sine wave. And then I smash it, that's the only way you'd be able to hear it. And it pairs nicely with the kick. Let's take a look at that real quick. So they play the same thing, follow each other. The 808 is supposed to sound a little bit like the kick on its own. Together they're heavy. By the way, you can hear my fan spinning because my computer doesn't like me recording video while I play stuff. And then the only other element is familiar. It's the same hook from the intro with a little bit more bass cut out. And then the only kind of cool thing about this is what happens at the end. There's a mini log shriek, and then the tail end of this this intro hook that play together. So we have the same chorus with one new thing. And all you can really hear from this delay guitar is when it hits that high note, but it's just there to add a little bit more from the previous chorus. So real quick, let's take a look at the break, and then I'm going to talk about the bigger picture stuff of how this is brought together and some more fine mixing tips. So let's listen to this real quick. Okay, so the whole point of this section is to be over the top and too much in every way, so that's what we did. So we got some percussion. I'll just play all of it by itself together. Here we go. So the beat's super simple, almost like a I don't know, dubstep-y beat, like when the music's heavy but the beat is like stupid simple. In my opinion, the cheap trick that drives this whole thing is this guy. This is bounced out for processing considerations, but this comes from the Logic built-in drummer. I'll play it. So it's doing very little, but it has that static wash right there. And the reason I say this is cheap is because normally I like to honestly make things heavy or loud or whatever. But in this case, I'm just throwing static over everything and it sounds kind of big. So when that all hits and that static opens up, I think that's part of what makes it sound big. In fact, if you take this away, it's probably going to sound kind of lame. Yeah, it's got no punch anymore. So it's possible I have that exact same sound here, in which case that's just like a mistake I made that happened to sound good. Yeah, it's literally the same thing. That's funny. Don't knock it, though. If it works, it works. So moving on to other stuff, we got an 808. Okay, I got to talk about this real quick. So free plugins, everybody loves them. This one is free. This is a plugin that, like, famous people use or whatever. It's called Fromage. This does cool stuff. I'll play with it real quick for you. So what I use it for is a bunch of overdrive, but it's got different settings that does like some comb filtering and other weird filtering stuff. I'm using it because I like the way it sounds when it is distorted. But this thing's free. I'd highly recommend you check it out, especially if you don't have good clipping plugins to distort things. Because as you've seen, every bass sound in this track is distorted because I know people are going to listen to it on their stupid phone, and I want it to sound reasonably okay. So next thing going on, this aggressor has shown up before. Notice that this is like living all the way in the low mids. It sounds super ugly, but if it was taking up the higher registers that would make it sound good, then other stuff wouldn't be able to sound good. I have another aggressor, and so this top one here is in the center. These other two are on the sides. These are taking up high end. They're panned hard left and right. If you're listening on headphones, you can hear that it's a different sound in the two sides. Together it sounds big. And even if I were to just put this into mono, it'll sound different. So it loses some of that space in mono. Other thing, we have this warble saw. Let's listen to that. Same preset I was talking about earlier. I think earlier it's called Burning Fuzz or something. Burning Saws. So this is filling in the high end that the aggressor lacks. So you have this aggressor low end all the way in the center, the wide aggressor, which is kind of mid-range, a little further out, and then this warble saw is fairly wide, just by nature of the way the patch is built. You can even see the delays on the left and right drop off at different points. Okay, that's all plug-in stuff. This one's actually more fun. At least it was more fun when I was making it. So this is more Minilog, so you can listen to how it sounds. So this is just slammed with that feedback and who knows how much distortion. And you can hear that it's deviating from the pitch it's supposed to play as well. Here, you can even on that note where it comes in out of that filter sweep, it's playing the wrong note. But again, it's supposed to sound chaotic. Remember, we don't want this to sound good. We want this to sound like disco in East Germany in the 90s. And then, arguably the thing that makes this breakdown is this ARP, which I'll point out is not even in the right key. And for the most part, just a preset. I don't know how much I even messed with it, just because it sounded right. So if we listen to the whole thing, it comes in with the ARP. But then I pull the ARP out and then bring it in again for the second half. And then ultimately, hold on, if I play this long enough, you get the whole ARP sound. It's the ARP that ends the track. I'll show you that later. Okay, last little thing. I don't even remember what this guy's doing. Let's listen to it. So The main thing this contributes is it has a filter that sweeps up as the note goes on, which, wow, I wish you could see me, because have you ever seen someone do that thing where they make their hand look like a squid, and it like they push their fingers out and the thing moves forward, and then they like bring their fingers together and it stops moving? That's what it sounds like. I know that's stupid, but that's what that's the sound, like this kind of slow building and then release, building and releasing, and having that filter sweep contributes to that. So if we listen to the whole thing together, by the way, that's what the white noise on that drum track I told you about is doing. Admit it, you're moving your hand like a squid right now. I can see you. That's pretty much everything going on here. So that's the whole track as far as how it's constructed. Last thing I did miss on the breakdown is that we do have that intro. Glitching and playing the same thing over and over again. That's crazy. Okay, so now that I've gone through how this was all built, I want to talk about putting it all together, making it into like a full track, a tiny bit about vocals, though there's not many in this track, and then just a little bit of like some tips. So let's talk about how this is put together. So from a mixing perspective, the whole song really is building up to this break. The break has to be good. So as I went to the final mix, I scrapped all the original mixes and started mixing this. Needed to make this loud and have impact. But as you'll hear, like, there's not a lot of bass. There's no snare. It's all just that white noise thing. So it's like not drums taking the place of actual drums. But anyway, everything had to build up to this. And then the other high point of the song is right here, when this gets really big and drops. So I mixed these two things first. They're super different, right? The break is all about high-end, washy, swishy stuff, whereas the bridge is all about low-end, like pounding, impactful stuff. And so they're big in different ways, which is probably good, because if you do the same thing twice, it's not going to sound big. And then this chorus in the middle is a little bit problematic because that's also super loud. But I made a conscious choice not to maximize this chorus, but to kind of save it for the break. So one thing that you might have noticed is there's a sound that I haven't talked about that shows up in every part of this track, and this is this effects. And this is not a plugin. This is recorded audio from the Minilog. And I had this creating white noise, and I played through the whole track, just had my hand on the cutoff and a couple other parameters. I was just changing the way things sounded. And so there's a really good example of what this contributes to the track here in the breakdown. So let's take a look at it. So this is fairly boring for the most part, but it does some things like that. Which I would argue are a big part of what keeps you interested in the breakdown. So the way I did this is I set the filter, in some sense it's called intensity, maybe it's the corner, I don't remember what it's called, but the thing that decides how sharp the filter is, cranked it all the way up. This is set on the 2-pole filter rather than the 4-pole filter because it sounds better on the Minilog. And when you do that, you can play literally any note, and the whole thing will oscillate around the filter's frequency that it's set at, and then you just move the cutoff to do that sweep. I mean, that's super basic stuff. It feels a little bit cooler because I did it, recorded it straight in from an analog synth. But if you listen to the breakdown, that stuff is part of what drives it. And the same thing happens all throughout the song. There's some filters opening here. Same type of idea. I do that a lot. And this, I picked something that worked and just looped it. Because why not? This sound sounds to me like something is feedbacking. And again, that's because I'm going one audio chain to the computer, one audio chain back to the input through overdrive. You can hear it here. That kind of screaming tonality. So that's one thing that kind of ties the whole thing together. Another thing that happens in the break that I haven't talked about is this filter sweep. So let me talk about that real quick. So there's a filter sweep on the whole track that comes right between these two halves of the breakdown. So we can take a look at that. To do this, I created a break filter group. So this is just an aux channel that I made, and I have things feeding into this. So this is bus 26, and you'll see I've got a lot of stuff you can see right here that's feeding into bus 26. So the break drums, I'll talk about that in a sec. This 808 bass, the aggressor, basically all the lead synths feed into that. And actually, this whole chaos feeds into it, as well as the ARP. So pretty much everything. And so what I am doing, you can check it out. So I have this just done with automation. And I'm just using the built-in EQ because I didn't want anything too crazy. I wanted it to be a little bit subtle. Even though subtle is normally lame, this time I wanted it. Okay, move. Okay, so check this out. So I'm just cutting out high frequencies. Now I originally done it with a really high Q, something like this. I'll let you hear what that would have sounded like. Okay, never mind. I'm automating the Q, so it changes. Okay, screw that. But basically, I'm pulling out all of the high frequencies, and it ends up being all the frequencies because I go down super low on the cut. And the reason I do that is to create a little moment of silence before we come in with the second half of that breakdown and things get loud again. And the reason that this is all about anticipation, you cut everything out, everyone's expecting it to come back in. When it comes back in, it confirms what they expected. People like self-congratulation, confirming what they already thought. So one other thing you'll notice, just listen to it real quick, is that the filter comes up late. And the reason for that is A, imperfection is kind of cool in music, but more importantly, by bringing it up late, it kind of highlights that it was there, that something happened. If you bring it up right when the beat's coming in anyway, then it's almost as if nothing happened. But if you bring it up a little bit later, you have the beat, the transients from the beat have already hit. You know every instrument plays that one on that section. So the beat, the sounds have already started to come through, and then you sweep the filter up through them, and that creates a cool sound. Just as the resonance of the filter accentuates all the frequencies as it comes up, that actually makes it a lot more potent than if you just had it come in right with the beat without kind of sweeping through it for a little bit. So that's what's going on there. This is a really good way to do things if you want to sweep a whole section. It's better to do this than to sweep the whole master output channel, because maybe you want to keep a kick going through the sweep or some other instrument going. And so this is a really good way to achieve that. Other things going on, yeah. Oops. Let me get my talk back. So all the drums come into this channel, break drums. Part of that's just for organization, but I do have a compressor on all these guys as a whole. And you can see it's pretty active. If I pull it off, it sounds better because it's louder. But when I put it on, it makes them more cohesive and it holds them together. And it creates kind of a constant rolling of the drums. If I pull it out and then like pull the volume down to what would be appropriate, it's just not going to sound as good. So that's what's going on there. When possible, it makes sense to compress things as a group rather than individually, because you want one thing getting louder to affect the loudness of other things and pull them down slightly. So moving on to other similar things that are going on. Let's see. I want to talk about this reverb throw. This is something really important that helps tie the track together. So if you look at where this is doing things, where I have its volume level automated up, you'll notice it's kind of in between all the major transitions, which is absolutely on purpose. So let me talk you through what this is doing. Let's listen to with and without. So first without.
Come and find.
If you're like me, you felt a tiny bit let down there after the intro. Listen to it with this throw.
Come and find me.
It creates this really cool kind of sheen of high frequency stuff that kind of dwells after the intro. Same thing is happening here if you listen from here.
Find me. I can't turn around to run.
You can hear this thing building up. In fact, the trail's still going on, but you can hear this thing building up, and if we listen without, it lacks some of that anticipation of what comes next.
Find me. I can't turn around to run.
Right? Like if you take the reverb throw off, it's like, okay, here's a verse and here's a chorus, fine. But when there's this reverb throw and there's something building up through the end of the verse, it's like, oh my gosh, something's happening.
I can't turn around to run.
So I have that at a bunch of sections. I also have it at this scream going into the next chorus. So let me talk about how this works, how it's built. So this whole thing relies on one of my very favorite plugins, Replica. So this is an awesome delay that Native Instruments gave away a couple Christmases ago. And the only setting I really use is this diffusion setting. I mean, the other settings are cool too. But this diffusion setting takes anything and turns it into this washy, spacey pad. Let me demonstrate right now. So let's listen to this delayed guitar. Cool. Now I'm going to throw it through Replica. So if I just straight up throw it, it adds delay. But when I take it to this diffusion setting, it's simulating basically a multi-tap delay, which is how reverbs in the 80s were built. But it's a lot of delays that cascade all over each other. That's the main thing you need to know. This is cool because it has a lot of stereo width if you have it in wide mode. And you can adjust the size, which is basically how many taps are on the delay. And so this does this really cool thing where it's not really a reverb, it's not a delay, it's just this washy ambience that's generated. So let me just listen to it and play with it as we listen. So depending on the size, it'll do different things. Also the feedback. But what's cool about it is that any sound can become a pad just by throwing this guy on it. Also, like, okay, let's just see what would happen if I were to use a regular reverb and try and get the same thing. So this is Logic Space Designer, which is not a bad reverb. And I can pick the longest reverb setting. Large spaces, well, let's see. I can look for the longest space that they have available. Maybe this. It's a reverb, you know? It's not a weird effect on its own. It's a reverb. But if I do it in Replica, I can replace whatever the original source audio is with this washy, blooming reverb sound. I don't know of any other plugins, at least none that I use, that do the same thing. So pretty much the only other way I can do that is with outboard gear. I've got a couple pedals from Strymon that do that sound really well. I think that Replica is every bit as good, and now it's like 30 bucks. Definitely a good investment. So basically what I have going on here is on this reverb throw, I'm collecting this on sends to bus 32. So if we look at a lot of this stuff, like this lead-in guitar, I'm sending to bus 32, which goes straight to the reverb throw. So the reason, uh, anyway, I can have anything show up on this reverb throw. So you'll notice here I have the reverb throw getting pretty loud, but you'll notice there's actually no volume coming out of it. That's just because none of these verse 3, I guess, tracks are routed to it. So anyway, you can route tracks to it, and then I just bring up the volume as it seems necessary. And so in this case, it's whenever there's a big transition that I kind of want to emphasize. So that's what I'm doing here. So that's what it's doing there. You can hear here as well. And it's super cool because it doesn't delay like a normal reverb would. It's hard to get the same kind of effect using normal reverb. Now, I also have some of these instruments, and I'm not going to be able to remember exactly which ones, going into a normal reverb as well on some of these transitions. I don't really want to dig through that right now. And I kind of left that because that's what I tried originally. But this reverb throw track that I put together using Replica is really the way to go. I did compress it just to get it to hold in longer. So you can see that going on here.
Come and find me.
So again, when you think about compression, whenever the pink bar moves to the left, it's turning the volume down. So whenever the pink bar is receding or going back over to the right, you can think of it as lengthening the amount of time that a certain sound is loud. So there's just a couple other things to take a look at. By the way, this reverb throw is what really cemented the track and made it feel like a song rather than a collection of parts. Okay. This is one of those things I was talking about. I'm sending this to a different reverb. So in addition to what you can see, I have a bunch of other aux sends going on. Like this vocal smash, which we can talk about. But other things like these reverbs and this delay filter, I'll talk about those on the vocals. But I do have this reverb. And this is one of my I usually use two reverbs, a small one just for like making it sound like it's in a real room, and then a bigger one for more reverby stuff. And you can hear what this one's doing here. So there is a little reverb boost here going into the that bridge. And the reason I wanted that is the bridge comes way down. So I wanted more reverb and more like real sounding reverb, not just the washy sound from the replica that I'm using. That's why I'm doing that here. That's not actually why I clicked on this track. That was just an aside that came at a good time. The reason I clicked on this is this track is called Chorus SC. That stands for Chorus Sidechain. So again, that's what's going on here with this guy. So this guy is coming down when the dancey bit comes up in volume. And I talked about that briefly, but the way I do this is bus 31. So I route the output, not just as a send, but I route the straight up output of everything I want controlled by that bus. So that's a really good way to sidechain large groups of things. So this chorus snares goes to it connected with a bunch of other stuff. And then all of that goes to this aux send, and then that goes to the output. So I use aux sends to sidechain groups of things together, to compress things as a group, and also to apply filter effects to a whole group of things. So the last thing to talk about with what is going on in this song is probably the vocals. Let me drag this guy down to the very bottom. So there's very minimal vocal on this track, but here it is.
Come and find me. I'm a lost, forgotten one. Shadows bind me.
So as far as what's going on here, I tend to use a fairly standard vocal chain on a lot of stuff. So I love throwing compressor on vocals. I think it makes people perform better. That's the main reason I like to do it, and then usually it sounds okay, so I leave it on.
Come and find me. I'm a lost.
So again, that's kind of smoothing out the dynamics, but more importantly, it's making Isaac, who sang on this track, perform better. Similarly, like I talked about, when I want to add bass that doesn't exist, I'm more likely to do it with this solid EQ, again made by Native Instruments, rather than just using the normal EQ plugin. So we can listen to before and after with this.
Come and find me.
It's kind of weak.
I'm a lost, forgotten one.
That gives a little bit more chest. Then I am high passing some of the very low bass.
Come and find me. I'm a lost, forgotten.
You almost can't hear the difference, but it's good to keep bass frequencies from building up. So this is the same take played twice because, again, East Berlin, mid-90s, nobody had time to record takes multiple times. On the third verse, the lyrics change slightly, but really the way it's put together is very similar.
Come and find me. I'm a lost, forgotten one. Shadows bind me.
I double it here.
Chase the light behind the sun.
Which makes it a little bit bigger. By the way, the best part of this whole thing is hearing Isaac laugh.
Chase the light.
It's like right here.
Behind me.
Yeah, I think I was screwing with him when he did that. So another thing that you will see on the vocals is I have them not just going to reverb. So you can see this guy is going to be getting some.
Find me. Come and find me. I'm a lost, forgotten one.
Well,
Shadows bind me.
I'm not seeing it show up, which is interesting. But so this is just a different send that I love to throw on vocals. I love to throw delay in addition to reverb. Sounds good. Lots of people do it. Almost sounds more professional than without.
Come and find me.
I'm not sure why it's not showing up. Could be something with how I've been messing around with things as I've been making this video. So that's really how this track is put together. So as I come to kind of lessons that can be learned, let me try and summarize. The first and most important lesson, especially with this track, is we weren't trying to make a good sounding song or a good sounding mix. There's a lot of things we did that don't sound good in like a typical sense. And the whole reason is we had a vibe we were going for, and hopefully that's what comes across when this song is listened to. It's very aggressive. There's a lot of high mids. There's a lot of stuff that sounds extremely digital as far as the synths go, and that's on purpose. We don't want all the synths to sound nice and pretty. Like come on, this thing. I mean, that's hideous. So is the shriek down here. But it's got an energy and kind of an emotional draw to it. And it goes with the lyrics and even the content, even though there's only like 2 lines in the song. The song's about mental illness, and yeah, that's what it's about. And that's more reflected by the music. It's just kind of raging. It's unpredictable. It changes sections a lot, so much that we had to use reverb to stitch the whole thing together. And that's intentional. You know, that's how it's supposed to be. It's the vibe we wanted. That's lesson number 1. Lesson number 2 is don't be afraid to just rip a sample out of somewhere. You didn't have to make it yourself. Or even if you're just sampling a preset of a synth you happen to own, you know, someone spent hours building that preset. Let's take advantage of it. So we shamelessly did that. And of course, the cool thing is that you can tweak the preset and get a remarkably different sound for different sections that still kind of comes back to one theme. Another thing to glean is when you think about sidechaining, think about frequencies. So when you have two things competing for the same frequency range, as happens with this dancey kind of offbeat thing, and well, the rest of the song, but especially like the kick and the bass. The sidechaining lets that dancey thing kind of stab its way to the front and then disappear and let everything kind of swallow it back up. And so that all comes from thinking about sidechaining as a way to kind of regulate who gets what frequency. Same thing goes on here with the slap bass in verse 3 and then the snare, kind of moving things out of each other's way. When it comes to any equipment, but especially analog equipment, the coolest thing is to feedback stuff. And you can feedback stuff in massive. I have that in some of the presets I've used on other songs. And other synths offer that option on another song that I'll probably do one of these demos for later. We use Monarch, which is a Moog emulator in Native Instruments Reactor. And that has the option to feedback stuff. The coolest sounds I find are always by throwing a bunch of feedback on there. So it's a good thing to experiment if you have the means, if you have synths that do it. It's like it's a new synth, really, because this bass sound, like a mini log that doesn't have a feedback chain kind of hacked its way around it, is not going to sound that low. Other lessons to glean, and I mentioned this when I was talking about frames, which is another walkthrough I did for another video, another track. All the bass is overdriven or bit crushed or somehow distorted so that it comes through, and that makes it sound bigger, because if you don't rely on speakers to reproduce at 40 hertz or whatever is the center for that instrument, and ears to hear that low, if you create those sounds that suggest to the listener that there is something at 40 hertz, and that's how harmonics work when you overdrive things, you can make it sound lower than you have the means or than your listener has the means to listen to. And so in that way, sometimes you can make more apparent low end by just overdriving what you have and even cutting the low end out because you don't need it anymore, because that's how ears work. So that's something that we do a lot of here. And then kind of the last big thing to glean from this is that reverb send trick, which is what stitches the whole thing together. And I lied. Actually, the most important tip that I discovered as I was mixing this, for stuff that's a long and drawn-out mixing experience, it can be really cool to go back to an old mix you did, and rather than like writing down what are all the settings of each preset, or of each track, all the EQs, and sometimes you can't even do that because something got lost and changed and you can't undo it. It's really cool to bounce stuff out, and it's almost like you're sampling yourself at that point. You're like, I know that I like the way this sounds, bounce it out. And then once you get it into Logic, you can change things. You know, we did some cutting of, different frequencies here. You can add new compression. You can do whatever you want. But you can get, if you're chasing a vibe rather than like a surgical perfect mix, which is what we were doing here, and we captured that vibe at one point, but it wouldn't be compatible just to go back to that old mix. It's not that hard to chop out sections of that and then re-import them, and then you have the exact vibe that you're going for, rather than trying to kind of recreate it. So that's something that we discovered as we were listening to just mix after mix and little tweak after little tweak, because we bounce these all out as WAV files and store them on a SoundCloud where the band can listen to them. And there are things that we liked about older versions, and so just being able to bounce that whole thing out and keep what it was that we liked, not some technical like, oh, it's 250 hertz, but just get that vibe. That's been really something that we learned on this track that we're applying to a lot of other things. It's making the mixing process go a lot smoother. So thank you for paying attention to however much of this you did pay attention to. This track's been a lot of fun to work on, and hopefully there's one or two gleanings for other folks who are interested in making music. I appreciate it.